Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. What's the point of winning by cheating? Bai Xiaochun grumbled angrily to himself. I, Bai Xiaochun, a mighty celestial, am straightforward and upright in everything I do. I absolutely detest anyone who cheats. Gradually, the jealousy he had felt regarding his opponent's tactics turned into anger. What was worse was that he was being looked down upon. And celestial Virupaksa had even threatened him. No, he said through gritted teeth. This is getting dangerous. I definitely can't allow Virupaksa to succeed. Eyes bloodshot, he pondered what to do. However, he knew that despite the fact that they were all celestials, and that he himself was particularly strong, he had only just become a celestial. Furthermore, if things did get down to a real fight with Virupaksa, the man wouldn't be afraid of being killed, he could just be resurrected by the vile emperor. In sharp contrast, Bai Xiaochun had not given part of his Daoseed to the Saint Emperor. That meant that if a fight did break out, he would be in great danger. What shameless bullying! The more he pondered the situation, the more incensed he was. After enough time had passed for an incense stick to burn, he still had not come up with any good ideas. Meanwhile, celestial Virupaksa had risen to his feet from meditation. Glancing coldly at Bai Xiaochun, he then went back into the fan rib to head to the 10th level. Everyone else looked on in envy. After Virupaksa disappeared, they too went back into the challenges. Before long, only 4 or 5 people were left on the outside, Bai Xiaochun included. If I were here by myself, maybe I could fight him. But I'm not alone, and Gu Tianjun and Sima Yunhua aren't going to help me. I guess the only option is to stop Virupaksa from winning the treasure. And the only way to do that is to become the owner of the fan before him. After putting more thought into it, he came up with a variety of ideas, and yet none of them seemed particularly promising. There's only one thing I can do. A tenfold spirit enhancement will erase any personal branding marks. If I enhance the fan, then maybe I could brand it with my own divine sense. If it works, then I would become the new owner of the fan. At this point, his heart was starting to pound a bit. In fact, he quickly forgot that his entire purpose in the matter was to stop celestial Virupaksa. If I can become the owner of the fan. His thoughts began to race in excitement for a while before he finally managed to calm himself down. Unfortunately, the fan was huge. Bai Xiaochun usually enhanced things by putting them into the turtle walk. Therefore, he wasn't sure how he would go about enhancing the huge fan. The fan can't shrink. I wonder if just clamping the walk down onto it will work. Although his heart was itching with anticipation, he was still fully on guard. After all, if someone saw what he was doing, it could cause major problems. Therefore, he put on a big show of snorting coldly and walking over to head back into the 7th level. Once inside the maze, he took out his wok, put it upside down on the ground, and then went about with a spirit enhancement. Unfortunately, after putting a one-colored flame into the wok, and finding no reaction, he frowned. After all his years of using the turtle wok, he could tell that the enhancement had failed. Feeling very disappointed, he picked up the turtle walk again and then sat there in a bit of a daze. Maybe it won't work inside one of the challenges. It might work outside though. Not quite willing to give up, he backed out of the 7th level and then sat down on the fan rib itself. At the moment, the main square of the fan was still occupied by a handful of cultivators who were resting after having failed one of the challenges. Bai Xiaochun waited patiently for 6 hours until all of them finished resting and headed back into the challenges. The square was completely empty. At that point, he took the turtle walk out and put it down in front him. With that, he placed one hand onto the walk, and used the other to pull out another one-colored flame from his dwindling supply. It's definitely going to work, he murmured anxiously. The one-colored flame disappeared into the walk, and a single silver flash of light shot out and hit the fan. As a result, the fan trembled. Did it work? He thought excitedly. However, there was no time for an inspection, as the light of teleportation appeared, and someone was sent flying out from one of the levels. Quickly putting the turtle walk away, Bai Xiaochun hurried into the 7th level. Of course, he had no intention of trying to make his way through the maze. After staying inside for a while, he left, plastering a look of confused disappointment onto his face. The truth was that his heart was pounding. Although there was nothing physically different about the treasured fan, he had definitely seen that silver flash of light. After paying very close attention to who was outside of the challenges, he found an opportunity when no one was looking, whereupon he took out the turtle walk and a two-colored flame. Almost immediately, a silver flash of light could be seen. Not pausing for even a moment, Bai Xiaochun quickly performed a third and then a fourth spirit enhancement. In nearly one breath of time, he completed 6 total enhancements. At that point, more people emerged from various trials, and he put the wok away and sat there sighing. Inside, he was laughing cheerfully, and eagerly awaiting the moment when everyone was back inside the challenges. He was hoping for an incense stick's worth of time, in which he could perform all of the rest of the enhancements in one fell swoop. 7 days passed. By that time, Celestial Virupaksa was in the 15th level. He seemed to be crushing every level with impunity, and maintaining a clear lead. The other Celestials were in the 9th, 10th, and 11th levels. As for the demigod preceptor Sedeep, he had reached the 8th level, and seemed stuck there. However, he wasn't willing to give up, and went back in constantly to make further attempts. Everyone else was roughly in the same situation, although no one else had proceeded past the 7th level. As for Bai Xiaochun, his lack of progress had become the butt of many jokes. Bai Xiaochun is a celestial, but he's stuck on the 7th level just like the rest of us. That makes it completely obvious that he's the weakest of all the celestials. Even Preceptor Sedeep is stronger than him. Well, he is from that backwater heavenspan realm. It makes sense that he would be embarrassingly weak even after becoming a celestial. It wasn't just the demigods and devas who reacted with derision. Gu Tianjun and Sima Yunhua completely ignored him, and secretly scorned him. It was the same with the celestials from the Vile Emperor dynasty. Bai Xiaochun didn't have the inclination to pay them any more attention than they paid him. He could sense the ridicule in their eyes but didn't care. By this point, the treasured fan already had a 17-fold spirit enhancement. Upon performing the 10th enhancement, he had been excited, but found that no golden light appeared, nor was there any sign that the branding mark controlling the fan had been removed. Although he had hesitated about what to do after that, he decided that a 20-fold enhancement was probably the answer. 30 is the limit for spirit enhancement, but this is an extraordinary sovereign-level magical item. I guess I just have to push things further. All I want to do is erase the branding mark. It shouldn't be that hard. It will all be worth it in the end, considering how much I hate cheaters. Bai Xiaochun worried constantly during the next 3 days. Eventually, he found his chance to perform the enhancements he needed. 18-fold, 19-fold. He had very few 20-colored flames left in his bag of holding, but he took one out and pushed it down into the turtle wok. The wok vibrated violently, and then the whole fan did the same. At that point, the light finally changed from silver to golden. The power of the spirit automaton of the fan appeared, the same automaton that had previously spoken into the minds of the cultivators. However, the power of the spirit automaton was clearly in the process of dissipating, being erased by some other power that surpassed it. Bai Xiaochun sucked in an excited, nervous breath. The two forces struggled, but the power of the spirit enhancement was clearly at a higher level, and began to gain dominance. However, the spirit automaton was by no means weak. It was like a tiger cub fighting a full-grown dog. In fact, it fought with such ferocity that the spirit enhancement's power began to weaken, and was gradually driven away. Gritting his teeth anxiously, Bai Xiaochun pulled a 21-colored flame out of his bag of holding. He only had 2 such tongues of flame left, and thus, it was with a great deal of pain that he tossed it into the turtle wok. Golden light flared, and rumbling sounds echoed out, along with land-shaking, mountain-rocking power. The power of the spirit enhancement once again rushed out to erase the branding mark inside the fan. Yet again, a battle erupted between the automaton and the spirit enhancement. The automaton could clearly not hold out for long, but was putting up a good struggle. At the same time, the spirit enhancement had reached a critical juncture. As of this moment, 20% of the branding within the damaged fan had been wiped away. That in turn allowed the restrictions on divine sense to loosen a bit. Bai Xiaochun knew that time was of the essence. On the one hand, people might come out of the fan at any moment, and on the other hand, the power of the 21-colored flame was growing weak. Damn it, I've got to go for broke. Taking advantage of the loosening of the restriction on divine sense, he sent his divine sense out. As the spirit automaton and the power of the enhancement struggled mightily, he shoved his divine sense into the empty section of the fan. Normally speaking, this was a thing that he could never do. Not even one of the Archean emperors would have been able to accomplish such a task. The only type of person who possibly could have would be another sovereign. But now, the impossible was happening thanks to the heaven-defying powers of Bai Xiaochun's turtle wok. Whichever sovereign it was who had created this fan could never have dreamed that their treasure could possibly be stolen in this manner. Bai Xiaochun howled from the effort, blue veins bulging out on his neck and face. As he pushed out madly with his divine sense, his own branding mark slowly began to take shape. The spirit automaton struggled, and the power of the spirit enhancement began to fade, but Bai Xiaochun took advantage of every moment. Although things were almost over, the automaton wouldn't give up, and continued to drive away the power of the spirit enhancement. However, Bai Xiaochun took advantage of his authority over 20% of the fan to fight back relentlessly. Eventually, the automaton was forced to give up. The branding mark faded away, and the fan went calm. It was almost as if nothing had happened. As for Bai Xiaochun, he had been holding nothing back, and was currently drenched in sweat. Quickly putting away his turtle walk, he sat there panting. Although this type of fight was different than magical combat, it had been extremely draining. He felt hollowed out, and yet at the same time, was extremely pleased. As of this moment, he could feel a very faint connection to the fan, something almost dreamlike in nature. I can't believe I did it. Ha ha ha, I branded my own divine sense mark onto this fan. Virupaksa, you cheater, this fan is mine. How do you think you'll get it now? He was so excited that he began laughing out loud, a fact that some returning cultivators noticed, and looked over in shock. To them, he looked a bit insane. Did he go crazy because he's been stuck in the 7th level for too long? As they chuckled coldly, Bai Xiaochun was recovering from the effort of the struggle. As he sat there cross-legged, his eyes shining, he took a moment to analyze the situation. He was already aware that although he had authority over 20% of the fan, he didn't actually control the fan as a whole. Essentially, the part of the fan that he had authority over was equivalent to the 1st through 20th levels. At this point, even if Celestial Virupaksa made it to the 20th level, whatever rewards he got wouldn't compare to what Bai Xiaochun had acquired. One would have an empty reward that could be taken away, and one would have a substantial reward that could directly contend with the fan's spirit automaton. Same as the 20th level, huh? That's good enough for me. Bai Xiaochun was very excited. This obviously made him the clear frontrunner in the competition. With this advantage, he was much more confident in being able to become the new owner of the damaged fan. The main thing he needed to do was make sure nobody realized what he had done. Alright, Celestial Virupaksa. Bai Xiaochun hates cheaters more than anything. Let's see you try and cheat now. Calling upon his mysterious connection to the fan, he was now able to see images of all the cultivators participating in the various challenges. He was also able to sense what the rewards were for the various levels. Some of the most enticing were the rewards for the 30th level and beyond, which were on the same level as world treasures such as the Greatsword of the North. Even more eye-catching was the reward for the 60th level, which was on the Archean level. There were also plenty of medicinal pills to be had. As for the reward for the 100th level, it was a glowing ball of light that pulsed with a sovereign aura. It was none other than the legacy itself. Convinced that he would become the owner of the fan, he realized that all of these rewards essentially belonged to him. It's not just the later rewards that are mine. Everything in the early stages is mine too. Just when he was about to check specifically on Celestial Virupaksa, he happened to notice a vile Emperor Dynasty demigod in the 6th level who was having trouble reaching the 8th step there. Bai Xiaochun recognized him. Back when he had been confronting Celestial Virupaksa, it was this burly demigod who had ridiculed him, Li Donghao. He was currently looking excitedly at the last step in front of him. He had attempted this level over 30 times already, and had failed each time. However, he had learned from each failure, and had progressed significantly each time. As of now, he was absolutely confident in being able to succeed. As for the reward, a feather, he had already been told about it by some of his friends. It had been identified as belonging to a now extinct immortal rock. If it were fused into a magical item, it would provide astounding benefits to it. Only one more step. I can definitely do it. Li Donghao excitedly lifted his foot up and prepared to step onto the 9th step. Even as he did, Bai Xiaochun's gaze fell upon him. When Bai Xiaochun saw the situation, he thought about how, if Li Donghao succeeded, it would mean the reward for that level, the feather, would be gone. Before, that fact wouldn't have meant much to him. But now that he was destined to become the owner of the fan, it meant that the treasures inside of it all belonged to him. Therefore, Li Donghao was essentially preparing to steal from him. Although Bai Xiaochun didn't view himself as being the miserly type, he really didn't like Li Donghao, and therefore, was not happy at all about the idea of him stealing. I guess this guy's just too lucky. If only the level could be a bit more challenging so that he fails. Back in the 6th level, the air rippled around Li Donghao. The ripples came because Bai Xiaochun was connected to the fan, and were something that no one else but him could notice. In the 6th level, Li Donghao looked as confident and excited as ever. He was absolutely and completely focused on this next step. Heart filled with hope, he put his foot down. I've been waiting a long time for this, he chuckled. All of that work and improvement is for this moment. Only by working hard can you get good results. I've finally done it. He threw his head back and laughed uproariously, then sighed at the feeling of accomplishment after all the effort he had expended. He felt like he had experienced something completely life-changing in this 6th level, something that would make his future more wonderful than he could imagine. Next comes the 7th level. A lot of the other demigods are going to be quite shaken by my success. After all, I'm only the second after Preceptor Seedeep to pass the 6th level. Amidst echoing laughter, he stretched his hands out wide in anticipation of the applause he would receive after being teleported out. However, his smile soon grew stiff as he realized that something strange was going on. Shocked, he looked around, and found that he was still in the 6th level. Huh? Why haven't I been teleported out? Based on everything he knew and had experienced, he should have been teleported out immediately. What's going on? At this point, he looked down, and his eyes went wide as his mind was battered by massive waves of shock, and no less than 100,000 lightning bolts of astonishment. This. To his complete and utter astonishment, he found that there was actually a 10th step in front of him. It looked exactly like the 9th step, and from all points of view, seemed to have always been there. And yet, Li Donghao was absolutely certain that in the past, there had only been 9. In fact, he had talked with others about this level, and it had always revolved around 9 steps. But now, there was a 10th. Could I have discovered some mysterious aspect to this level? Panting, his uneasy feeling was replaced with one of excitement. Perhaps what was happening wasn't bad. Perhaps it was fate. However, even as he began to get excited, his jaw dropped in utter shock. There, right in front of his eyes, another stair appeared right after the 10th, radiating intense pressure. 11, 23, 35, 49, 67, 81, all the way to 100. How could this even be possible? 100 stairs. Li Donghao suddenly felt dizzy, as if he might fall over at any moment. The scene playing out in front of him was almost completely absurd, a massive staircase stretching out. Furthermore, the pressure he could sense from the final stair was virtually beyond imagination. Li Donghao was trembling, his eyes vacant, as though his mind had collapsed. He seemed completely bowled over by the sight of 100 stairs. How could this be happening? He mumbled, his face ashen. Even as the massive pressure threatened to overwhelm him, the power of teleportation gripped him, and he was whisked out of the 6th level. When he reappeared, he was back in the main square. Because of the massive blow he had just taken, as soon as he appeared, he coughed up a massive mouthful of blood and staggered backward, his face completely overtaken by shock and disbelief. As of this moment, his previous confidence was absolutely gone. This is impossible, he murmured. How could this be happening? There were only 9 steps before. He actually didn't believe what he had just seen, and was convinced that it was all an illusion. He even went to some of his demigod compatriots from the Vile Emperor dynasty to ask them their opinion. Grabbing one of them by the arm, he asked, "Fellow Taoist Shu, how many stairs are in the 6th level?" When the man saw how bloodshot Li Donghao's eyes were, he was quite taken aback. The demigod hesitated for a moment, then said, 9. Why, what's wrong, Li Donghao? Li Donghao's mind was spinning, and he began to pant. He quickly hurried over to another demigod who was stuck in the 6th level, and asked the same question. 9. 9. Everybody knows that, it's not a big secret or something. What are you doing, Li Donghao? Do you really need to ask things like that? Just go look for yourself. Li Donghao was trembling violently by now, and felt completely and utterly humiliated. At the same time, he was getting angry. 9? All of you? Why'd I have 100? Back within the level, he had been unsure, but now he was convinced that the damaged fan hated him. And that filled him with profound despair. People were shocked to hear the information from Li Donghao, and were a bit suspicious. However, most of them assumed that the levels would occasionally become more difficult for some unknown reason. Li Donghao got really unlucky. The levels probably don't change very often, he just happened to be in there when it happened. We'd better hurry. You never know when those 100 stairs could appear in our version. Off in the distance, Bai Xiaochun was listening in. Of course, he had witnessed everything firsthand. And the truth was that even Bai Xiaochun was not confident in being able to handle 100 stairs like that. At first, he was actually shocked by what had occurred. But then, his heart filled with joy. I just thought about the level getting harder, and it did. 100 stairs appeared. His eyes began to glitter brightly at the realization that a huge door had just been opened in front of him. So, now that I've successfully taken control of 20% of the fan, it means I can alter the first 20 levels. Heavens, how stupid of me. I don't even need to think about how to pass the first 20 levels. Considering the powers I have to control the level of difficulty, fudge. I'm like a god in this place. My original goal wasn't to make things easy for myself, it was to prevent others from passing the 20th level. Once this trial by fire ends, I'm going to come out in first place. All of a sudden, this mission to the damaged fan seemed much more interesting than it had been before. Ha ha ha, I'm basically the guardian of this fan. I need to prevent everyone else from succeeding. With his new mission having been made clear, he stuck his chin up and then sighed. Around this time, he could sense that celestial Virupaksa had passed the 17th level. Not even stopping, he then proceeded on to the 18th. So fast, Bai Xiaochun murmured, shocked. However, a sly smile quickly spread out on his face. Virupaksa, you villain. I absolutely hate cheaters like you. Well, if you make it past the 18th level, then I'll change my name to match yours. Meanwhile, in the 18th level of the damaged fan, a vast, scorching desert stretched out in all directions, covered by screaming winds that sent dust and grit scraping across jutting rock outcroppings. Anyone who stood in that desert would be able to sense how barren and desolate it was. Barely visible within the never-ending sandstorm that filled it were numerous skeletons, apparently the remains of countless beings which had died here throughout the years. It was actually impossible to tell whether the skeletons were indeed people who had been killed here, or whether they had simply been put here. In any case, as soon as celestial Virupaksa entered this level, he felt a sensation of profound danger. However, that didn't slow him down at all. Instead, it made him feel even more grand and heroic. After snagging the position of top contender, I can get through each level before anyone else. It's obviously destiny. It's obviously good fortune belonging to me, celestial Virupaksa. It's obviously fated that I will become the owner of this sovereign-level precious treasure. As he stood there with his hands clasped behind his back, he looked like the picture of confidence. And he was, in fact, completely confident that he would be the first to get through every level, including this, the 18th. Much of his confidence came from the fact that he was in the great circle of the celestial realm. The only other person in the entire damaged fan that could possibly be a cause for concern was Gu Tianjun. Celestial Virupaksa wasn't too worried about Bai Xiaochun. He had only recently become a celestial, and was little more than a clown. Celestial Virupaksa was fairly certain that, although he had been frustrating to deal with earlier, he could easily be killed if necessary. Although this 18th level will likely be more difficult than the previous levels, I won't be stopped. I wonder what kind of powers I'll receive after passing the 20th level. Smiling, he blurred into motion as he headed deeper into the sandstorm. In almost the exact same instant, the countless grains of sand that made up the storm began to form together into an enormous head. Celestial level cultivation base fluctuations erupted out, along with a powerful roar as the head then lunged toward Virupaksa as if to consume him. Celestial Virupaksa's eyes narrowed as, without pausing for a moment, he shot like an arrow toward the fearsome sand head. The resulting boom caused the entire 18th level to shake violently. As these things played out, something happened that celestial Virupaksa didn't notice. High above in the sky of the 18th level, two eyes were watching everything. Those eyes, of course, belonged to Bai Xiaochun. No one had any idea what was happening, of course. And as for Bai Xiaochun, he didn't rashly do anything in the 18th level. He first observed the situation. Celestial Virupaksa was definitely a very powerful fighter. Booms rang out as he engaged the enormous head in combat, causing shockwaves to spread out in astonishing fashion. Soon, it became apparent that this head of sand with its celestial level battle prowess was no match for Virupaksa. Observe how I bring you to ruin. Bai Xiaochun murmured, snorting coldly. Although it felt wonderful to be in such a position of authority, he was actually shocked by celestial Virupaksa's battle prowess. This guy has actually surpassed me in terms of fleshly body. Although his powers of regeneration don't even come close to mine. And his divine abilities are way weaker. Plus, there's no way he can keep up this level of fighting for long. Eyes flickering, he watched celestial Virupaksa perform a double-handed incantation gesture to summon a massive tree, which he used to batter the head of sand. 1 blow, 2 blows, 3 blows. Each blow caused the head to shriek in pain. As for celestial Virupaksa, he advanced with each blow until he was actually inside of the head. Instead of resorting to any sort of magical technique, he was simply blasting the head in two. The mere sight was enough to make Bai Xiaochun a bit uneasy. The destructive aura of that huge tree was so shocking that it caused the sky to go dim, and sent sand exploding out in all directions. Finally, Virupaksa resorted to a divine ability that combined his fleshly body and cultivation base to unleash a devastatingly destructive blow. The head of sand was destroyed, and the faint light of teleportation began to build up. Despite being shocked, Bai Xiaochun couldn't forget what he had said earlier about changing his name to match Virupaksa's. Therefore, he didn't hesitate to call upon his connection to the fan to change the difficulty of the 18th level. In that moment, celestial Virupaksa's uproarious laughter was echoing out through the desert as he looked at the two halves of the defeated sand head he had just fought. Although the battle left him seriously drained in both cultivation base and fleshly body power, his heart was bursting with pride. Perhaps Gu Tianjun or Reverend Devourer could deal with this little 18th level, but most other celestials could not. It gives a good indication of how difficult the 19th and 20th levels will be. Very well, the harder things get, the better the rewards will be. It just goes to show that I truly qualify to contend for this legacy. Chuckling, he looked around at the light of teleportation that was building up around him, and prepared to go back to the main square to do some breathing exercises. Once I become the owner of the fan, the first person I'll kill is Bai Xiaochun. His powers of regeneration are too strong. If he lives, he'll definitely cause problems in the future. He quickly checked Bai Xiaochun's progress, and upon seeing that he had still not passed the 7th level, snorted in derision. He was absolutely convinced that this damaged fan was a land of good fortune for him, and would likely be his ticket to reaching the Archean realm. Celestial Virupaksa's heart swelled with pride and courage. However, it was in that very moment that, with no warning whatsoever, the light of teleportation that had been building up suddenly went out. Huh? He looked down at himself, and then at the desert around him. What's going on? Before he could do anything else, the enormous sandstorm sprang up again, with even more fury than before. Furthermore, two enormous heads formed, each of them with battle prowess surpassing the previous solitary head. Howling, they charged toward Celestial Virupaksa. Celestial Virupaksa was struck with the feeling that something odd was going on, but there was no time for thought or planning. As the two heads closed in, he took a deep breath and unleashed his divine abilities and magical techniques, jumping into combat. The fury of their battle was so great that the world seemed to tremble on the verge of being destroyed. Celestial Virupaksa held almost nothing back. With the exception of Taoist magics relating to willpower, he called on everything he could, even all of his trump cards. After 2 incense sticks worth of time passed, he destroyed both of the heads. He was spattered with blood and trembling from the effort, but he had come out on top. So, I underestimated this 18th level. And yet, who cares if I did? He threw his head back and laughed uproariously. Bai Xiaochun was not happy at all to see Celestial Virupaksa laughing in such fashion. Eyes bloodshot, he murmured, such a savage. Come on, I want to see you in despair. Fine, I'll push the difficulty as far as it will go. The 18th level twisted and distorted, to the point where Celestial Virupaksa actually noticed what was happening. Expression flickering, he looked around, feeling very uneasy. Don't tell me it's still not over? Even as he let out a gasp, the entire world around him filled with shocking rumbling noises. The sandstorm yet again screamed into existence, filling the world and then transforming into 10 enormous heads. If that were all there were to it, it might not be a big deal. But to Celestial Virupaksa's profound astonishment, a 30,000-meter tall hand also appeared, stretching up out of the ground. Then another, and another. As it turned out, several giants were crawling up from the depths of the earth. There were a total of 10. The tops of their heads touched the sky as they surrounded Celestial Virupaksa, making him look like a helpless girl surrounded by a gang of ruthless thugs. Their energy caused the entire world to vibrate and turn terrifyingly dark. As for Celestial Virupaksa, he looked around trembling, and said, "Impossible. This is impossible." Celestial Virupaksa looked around, trembling, his eyes blank from the terrifying nature of the 10 giants' energy. Although it wasn't quite on the Archean level, it was immeasurably close. This was only a trial by fire, but at the moment, Celestial Virupaksa had completely forgotten about that point. The enemies he now faced were so outrageously powerful that he almost wondered if the damaged fan were playing a practical joke on him. There was simply no way that he could fight enemies like this. Rumbling booms echoed out as the 10 giants unleashed heaven-destroying, earth-extinguishing power onto Celestial Virupaksa. They were like 10 vicious beasts, all of them stamping down without mercy. It was such a fearsome sight that even Bai Xiaochun couldn't help but gasp. Blood-curdling screams filled the world of the 18th level, but thankfully, they didn't last long. Celestial Virupaksa soon vanished. After all, this trial by fire was not deadly in nature, and did not permit fatalities. Anyone who failed would, at worst, be teleported out of the level. As for Celestial Virupaksa, although he wasn't dead, he felt like he was. All of his pride, all of the momentum he had built up through the levels, vanished. He could only be grateful that the natural laws within the damaged fan kicked in and pulled him out. If that hadn't happened, he would have been in a truly miserable and hopeless state. Outside in the main square, teleportation light glittered, and celestial Virupaksa appeared. The first thing he did was cough up a huge mouthful of blood, and stagger backward to look at the fan rib he had just come from, his eyes shining with disbelief. How could this be happening? It's impossible. That level of difficulty. If the 18th level is really that hard, the levels after it would have to be outrageously difficult. There's something strange going on here. Not only was Celestial Virupaksa completely crestfallen, he was also starting to get a bit angry. The others who were gathered in the main square could see how confused Celestial Virupaksa was, and how badly he was trembling. Obviously, it didn't take much guesswork to come to the conclusion that he had failed to pass the level. Celestial Virupaksa is still on the 18th level? And he actually failed. There must be something unusual about that level. Otherwise, how could the incredible Celestial Virupaksa possibly have failed, and come out of it looking so out of sorts? As the talk spread, Bai Xiaochun sat there, clearing his throat and blinking. Peeking out of the corner of his eye at Celestial Virupaksa, his heart swelled with excitement and pride. I guess you shouldn't have cheated, huh? How dare you try to contend with Lord Bai? The corners of his mouth even turned up into a slight smile. Celestial Virupaksa's bedraggled state eased some of Bai Xiaochun's anger. After all, the man had openly provoked him, and then even threatened him. Considering that, simply making the level a bit harder was actually going easy on him. That's my biggest weakness. I'm too kind. In the cultivation world, the law of the jungle prevails. I really shouldn't be this nice. Sighing, he looked over again at the dazed Celestial Virupaksa for a moment before checking on the situation with some of the other trial takers. In one fell swoop, he increased the difficulty level for all of them. Before long, teleportation light began to flicker as demigod and devas from both dynasties were sent back to the main square. All of them were coughing up blood, and looking very confused. Impossible. Yesterday in the 3rd level, I fought 3 beasts. But today, there were 300. Heavens. You guys have no idea what just happened. In the 5th level, I actually had to fight a celestial level puppet. That's nothing. Damn it. I was really getting places in the 7th level, but right before reaching the end, the maze came to life and started changing around me. Everyone was crazily talking at once until Celestial Virupaksa's eyes suddenly began to turn very grim. The level of difficulty increased. Even as everyone started to come to this conclusion, Gu Tianjun, Sima Yunhua, Prince Demon, and Reverend Devourer all teleported out. That entire group of Celestials had been stuck in the 16th level, a fact they could have lived with until the difficulty increased. At the moment, all of them had very unsightly expressions on their faces. Bai Xiaochun was obviously delighted, but didn't let it show on his face. Instead, he wore a scowl. To further the act, he hurried into the 7th level as if to look around. Upon emerging, he exclaimed, "The 7th level did change. Heavens! You people wouldn't believe what I saw in there. Absolutely terrifying." On any other occasion, Bai Xiaochun's exaggerated cries would have provoked cold laughter. But right now, everyone was so grim-faced that they didn't even notice. All of them were trying to figure out why, all of a sudden, all of them had experienced failures. The trials of the damaged fan had only been open for half a month, and now all of them were feeling very dazed and bereft of any hope. Bai Xiaochun's plan was just to wait for the time limit to run out 2 months later. However, who could have predicted what was to come only half a month later? Suddenly, the spirit automaton of the damaged fan, which had faded away into slumber after being assailed by the power of the spirit enhancement, woke up. Rumbling sounds filled the entire damaged fan, and all of the levels instantly went back to normal. None of them had increased levels of difficulty anymore. Furthermore, after awakening, the spirit automaton locked its attention onto Bai Xiaochun, as though it wished to wrest full control of the fan back. That was quite startling to Bai Xiaochun, who sat there rotating his cultivation base and doing his best to maintain his strange connection to the fan. He was like a rowboat on stormy seas, his mind reeling as his connection was attacked ferociously. If he had been in the demigod realm, his mind would have already collapsed, and his connection broken. But Bai Xiaochun was a celestial now, and although he couldn't fight back, he could defend himself. Unfortunately, he didn't know how long he could hold out. No one in the area had any idea what was happening, not even the Celestials. This was a level of combat that far surpassed them, and they couldn't even detect it. 4 hours passed in which Bai Xiaochun trembled, his face slowly turning ashen. He was pushing his cultivation base to the limits, and was reaching the point where his mind couldn't handle the stress. At that point, right when his strange connection to the fan was about to be severed, he heard a howl of defiance as the spirit automaton slowly faded away into slumber again. Bai Xiaochun opened his eyes. He was drenched with sweat and was mentally exhausted. It had been a vicious struggle in which he could clearly sense how much the damaged fan hated him. Thankfully, the spirit automaton is also damaged and can't stay awake for very long. He took in a shaky breath. However, now that he had full control of the fan back, his face suddenly fell. Damn it, they took advantage of me again. As of this moment, he realized that in the 4 hours that he had been struggling with the spirit automaton, quite a few people had gone back into the challenges. Li Donghao had passed the 6th level. Preceptor Sideep was in the 9th level. Jiu Tianjun and the other celestials were in the 16th and 17th levels. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.